New branding. Nice. Well anyway, we're at the big one, so here we go. Kirby's big return to a home system with the Super Nintendo, Kirby Super Star. Which, fun fact, besides Nightmare and Dreamland, was the last Kirby platformer Sakurai was in charge of. Not much else of a development history for this one, but it is considered by many to be the best Kirby game in the lineup. The question is, does that claim apply to me as well? Well, only one way to find out, so let's get into it. So, story out of any Kirby game is probably the least important in Superstar above all others, because each game in Superstar is broken up into its own tale that really are more just days in the week for Kirby. If you want a quick synopsis, Spring Breeze is the same as Dreamland, Dinah Blade is where you need to stop a giant bird, Great Cave Offensive shows Kirby's horrible awareness skills, Gourmet Race is just a food race against deity, the Revenge of Mennonite is Mennonite's revenge? He really couldn't pick what side he was on before, but now he wants revenge now. Okay, that's fine. And Milky Way Wishes is you stopping the sun and moon from fighting. And that's it. Not very important, let's get a move on. So the jump to 16 bits is gonna lead a lot of great things for the presentation, and Kirby Superstar takes advantage of the fact that it's doubled its bits. First and foremost, just look at the colors. It's a lot bolder and brighter than Adventure, and everything just pops out wonderfully. Enemies are given great expressions when you fight them, such as these sunflowers, and everything goes into making it feel like Kirby has really made a big jump. And the best part of that jump for me are the hats. Whenever Kirby inhales an enemy, he gets a little hat on his head that clearly shows what the ability is. And this seriously makes every ability even more exciting to get. I don't know why, it just is. However, while it looks great for Kirby, I don't think it's that great for the Super Nintendo. By this point, we had stuff like Mega Man X, A Link to the Past, Super Metroid, Yoshi's Island, Star Fox, and they did more to push the Super Nintendo, and I think the art style of those games held up a lot more. When I look at Superstar, I can tell it's dated. I think I see that most with Mennonite and how off-model he looks, and Kirby, who, honestly, just look how much he's bloated out. It doesn't look right to me. Maybe I might be a bit harsh here, but considering Kirby's Adventure was a late NES game and I think it looks great for that system, while Superstar was a late SNES game and it just looks okay, I think it's fair to say this one falls a little on the weak side. But I will say for the SNES, the soundtrack is great stuff. You have a lot of the normal Kirby tunes from the series, but some of the best songs in the franchise make their debut in this game. The Mennonite's Revenge ending, the arena, and one of my favorite songs in any Kirby game, the Gourmet Race. I can seriously listen to that song for hours and not get tired to it. So taking all that into account, I think the presentation is overall pretty decent for the 16-bit jump. But with all these different games in here, how does the game play? So Kirby Superstar is broken up into various sub-games. While the game advertises that there's 6 adventures, it's really more just a world in another Kirby game with a gimmick attached to each one. The goal is still to reach the end using any power of your choosing. With these games, you have Spring Breeze, which is an abridgment of Kirby's Dreamland, this time with powers and the entire Castle Lolo level missing, no Kabula, and nothing in King Deity's castle besides a boss fight. Next is Dinah Blade, where you move on a Mario 3 styled map until you fight off this giant bird attacking Dreamland. Great Cave Offensive is a huge exploring maze with a lot of items to collect for the sake of collecting. The Revenge of Mennonite is a fast-paced adventure where you try and take down Mennonite's ship, the Halberd, and Milky Way Wishes is where you go from different planets in order to save the day. But Kirby can't take copy abilities from enemies, but you find them in levels and can use them at any time after that. And then there are 4 more mini-game type of adventures. Samurai Kirby, which is like Quick Draw and Adventure and Nightmare and Dreamland. Megaton Punch, where you need to time your button presses and try and crack Popstar in half. Seems like a bad idea considering you live there, but okay. Gourmet Race, where you need to race King Deity to see who can collect the most food and come in first place. And finally the arena, where you fight every boss in the game with limited amount of health refills. And unlike Adventure, you can actually pick your power this time. Now, Kirby himself is rocking his familiar power-ups again, though this time they've been retweaked a bit. Now abilities have multiple moves done by an attack and a button, and most of them combine previous abilities together, such as Fire and Burning or Ice and Freeze, which honestly makes a lot of sense and makes some abilities way more fun to use. and adds more depth to each one. There's a good mixture of new ones such as Yo-Yo, Fighter, Ninja, Mirror, Jet, and my personal favorite of the new ones, Wing, which allows Kirby to fly really fast and makes exploring really quick. Kirby also has a new guard ability by holding one of the shoulder buttons that allows him to minimize the amount of damage from an attack. Pretty helpful tool. And one last change is that Kirby can't send abilities out as a star anymore. Instead, he can make a helper by giving up the ability that he had. A second player can also help you out by commanding these helpers at any time. They don't take away from your life count, and if they're about to die, they can touch any enemy and take their power instead. Oh, and when you grab food and you want to heal them, you know how a mama bird feeds her kids, yeah. Though if they are a nuisance to you, you can take the ability back at any time. And I think that's about everything for Superstar. A lot more compared to the other games I know. So how much of that did I enjoy? So a lot of people cite Superstar as a game that really set the new standard for what a Kirby game would be known as. And I agree with them in a lot of ways. For one, as I mentioned before, I love the hats Kirby gets. I think it's a much better way to identify what power you have, but it adds a lot more personality to each ability and makes me want to use them a lot more. And the soundtrack is great stuff too. Next, the improved ability system is such a great new addition. Now every power gets a lot more utility to them and makes them much more enjoyable to use in any situation. Stuff like Fire and Cutter are way more fun, and abilities like Beam and Plasma are way more viable and powerful. This also gives rise to the Hammer Up B move, which remains to this day one of the most disgustingly powerful moves Kirby has ever had. And the new abilities blend in so well it's hard to tell them apart from the old ones. That's pretty impressive, and many of the abilities introduced here would become mainstays for the rest of the series. While I'm not a huge fan of the partner system, as I'll go into in a bit, I do like the idea of having co-op at any time, as it can be a lot of fun and it's nice to see a feature like this added to the series. And while not every sub-game is to my liking, there are ones I just have way too much fun with, and bring a level of excitement to Kirby that we haven't seen before. That being present in my two favorite of the bunch, Gourmet Race and the Revenge of Mennonite. I like how different the race feels in comparison to the other modes, and makes you think differently on how you traverse with Kirby. The last one is my favorite mainly because of the abilities you used, and it's probably the reason why I learned to love Wing so much. I just wished it was a little harder or had a harder course or a multiplayer or something, since you can destroy deities so easy it's not even funny. But the Revenge of Mennonite, oh man, this is the highlight of the game for me. The fast-paced nature of the level, each part having a unique feel, seeing the ship get more and more unstable as you take out their defenses, taking out each of the bosses like the Heavy Lobster and Generator, Mennonite trying to stop you all the time during the final parts, and seeing that ship fall into the sea with that Western trumpet playing in the back. Simply awesome! Plus, I think this game easily has the best set of bosses we've seen in a Kirby yet. From the battle with Dinah Blade, the origin of Master Hand, to one that's an RPG battle that gives you random, useless experience points. They all stand out in their own ways and feel much more engaging than previous games' fights. But I do have some issues with this little fun pack. I won't lie, Superstar does have a lot of things that end up making the game sometimes not as fun to play as the previous entries. I'm not a fan of every game, and some of them drag out for way too long. The prime culprits are the Great Cave Offensive and Milky Way Wishes. Milky Way Wishes isn't necessarily long, it just feels long. You have a lot of levels in here that are basically repeated level designs from earlier in the game, which, I mean, in terms of a final level makes sense in some regards, but besides the ability system, that's the only real difference in gameplay. And a lot of these rooms are more of puzzle maze type of rooms. So most of your time is just going to be finding the right path rather than the fast-paced nature of, say, Spring Breeze, Dinah Blade, or Mennonite's Revenge. So the levels tend to run their course really fast. But easily my least favorite of the minigames is Great Cave Offensive. By far the longest of the games, and by far the most dull of them to me. The main goal is to explore this land and find all the hidden treasures. The problem? The treasures do absolutely nothing besides make the percentage meter go up, so there's really not a reason to collect them all, so when I replay the game, I'm speeding through this section. But if you do that, you really notice how bland a level design gets here, and it still drags on. If the treasures actually unlock stuff, I would have been down for collecting them all, but as they are, I'm just hurrying to Mennonite's Revenge ASAP. And on to those partners that I mentioned earlier. While they're great when you have a buddy right next to you, when you have a CPU control them, they are downright morons! They almost never attack with you, run into obvious danger all the time. Stuff like this makes me really not enjoy this system, and the fact that you can't do the classic star removal is annoying. I also found the screen to be kinda small in certain spots. Like how much of the screen you actually have compared to Adventure, it's not nearly as much, and there's a lot of vertical platforming this time. Meaning you will most likely get blindsided by something, which gets old-fashioned, especially when you know it's not your fault. Superstar's a bit of a weird one. Half of the game I really love, and half of the game is just kind of to me, so... As for the whole package... So overall, I find Superstar to be a pretty fun time. I love the additions to the copy abilities, the faster paced games like the Revenge of Mennonite are a good time, and the bosses are really engaging. But Superstar I feel is a better game when you can pick the sub-games that you want to get to, rather than going through all of them. As games like Milky Way Wishes and especially Great Cave Offensive just drag the pace down a bit for me. Not to mention annoyances like the helpers kind of distract me a bit too much to put this game over Adventure, Nightmare in Dreamland, and even Dreamland 1. And to be honest, nowadays I wouldn't say to go play the SNES original. Mainly because we have a little something else. And that something else would be this, Kirby Super Star Ultra, released for the DS in 2008. A remake of the Super Nintendo version, and just like Nightmare in Dreamland, there's a lot to go over with this one. So first off, when you boot the game up, you'll notice all the cutscenes have now been rendered into 3D, and they look great and definitely add a lot more to each of their scenes. I know it looks kinda blurry, but that's because I'm stretching a DS screen to be this big. It looks a lot better on the actual device. Next, all the life bars and the power information have been moved to the bottom screen, so the top screen is now cleared out. And good thing too, because the game looks so much better than the original SNES version. The sprite work is a lot more colorful, pops out a lot more, and gives off more emotions than the original, and everything just looks cleaner overall, even the menus. Plus, the camera is zoomed out a little bit more, so that running into stuff problem doesn't really happen anymore. But that bottom screen isn't just used for life and powers. The Great Cave Offensive now has a map that labels each of the treasures you've gotten in an area, or in Milky Way Wishes, it tells you how many of the powers are on a planet, and you can quick select using the touchscreen or the pause method if you want. And also, by pressing select, you can eject a power as a star again and not have to worry about a helper. Thank you! Ultra not only brings 3 new minigames with it, being a card swipe game, a shooting gallery, and a conveyor belt management game, but it adds 4 new sub-games to the total package after you beat the originals from the Super Nintendo version. First up is Revenge of the King, a sort of remake of Dreamland's Extra Mode, kind of? That's my best guess into what this is based off of. But the layout isn't exactly the same, and honestly, because of the bigger screen, abilities, and enemy patterns not being as fast or stuff like aerosols not attacking you, it's not that hard, so you don't have to worry about this one putting up much of a fight. But they did add back in the boss fight against Kabula, and a full level for Castle Deity, which is appreciated, and a brand new boss fight with the king in form of Mass Deity, who, honestly, I think could have been a bit tougher. Seriously, revisiting this boss fight, that life bar went down way too fast, it's almost sad. But this does give us the Mass Deity theme, which is easily one of my favorite songs in the entire series. I need an orchestrated version of this so badly. Next up is Helper to Hero, a sort of arena where you play as one of the helpers, each with their own ability, except for Sword and Blade Knight. You go through 13 battles with one ability until you reach the boss of this game, Wham Bam Jewel. A slightly harder version of its rock counterpart, but that's about it. But then there's the big one, Meta Nightmare Ultra, where once again you take the helm of Mennonite and play through all 5 of the original platforming stages in Superstar. Now last time in Meta Nightmare on Nightmare in Dreamland, I didn't find him that fun because his attacks were delayed and it felt limited compared to Kirby. I'll just tell you now, it's a night and day difference here. Mennonite controls as smooth as butter now, his attacks come out right away, he has the speed of Wing Kirby now, this is so much fun! But if you look at that bottom screen, Mennonite has a few more tools to help him out. Whenever you defeat enemies in Meta Nightmare Ultra, you gain points. You can hold 50 in total and have 4 different skills you can use. You can summon a partner to help you out, which normally I don't do in the main game, but for this mode, every enemy they kill, you still get points, so it's worth having them around. You also have a health power that acts like a maximum tomato, refilling you the max health, a speed up, which speeds you up, and finally Mock Tornado, which kills everything on screen. Each of the 5 sections will also keep a record time for you, so the goal is to get through this mode as fast as possible. And then at the end of Milky Way Wishes, there's a bit of a bonus. Instead of fighting the normal final boss, Mennonite fights the strongest warrior in the galaxy, Galactica Knight, in easily the best fight of the game and has an absolutely rockin' song. I'm still honestly shocked this hasn't found its way into Smash Brothers yet. This is by far my favorite of the extra modes, and it feels great to play as a Mennonite that controls this well. But there still is one more thing left, the true arena, unlocked after playing the other 3 extra modes. This is another boss fight that includes all the harder versions of the Revenge of the King fights, Kabula, another mini-boss gauntlet, and then the final bosses of the 3 game modes with a brand new boss for the final showdown. While it's only 10 fights, you are given only 5 apples for the whole thing, which basically is 1 full health bar. As you would expect, this is by far the hardest part of the game, and trust me, this one is going to take a lot of memorization and maximum use of your abilities in order to beat. In fact, beating it for this video is the first time I managed to do so without another player. Which leads into my only real downside of this version, the multiplayer. You need 2 game cards in order to play the full game together. Otherwise, you can only use DS Download Play to do Spring Breeze or the Minigames together. But that's seriously the only complaint I got with this remake. In my eyes, there's no reason to go back to the Super Nintendo version when Ultra exists. Ultra not only improves the presentation, controls, and gameplay, but it adds a lot more content with the 4 new sub-games that are just as good, if not better than the original games, especially stuff like Mad Nightmare Ultra. I don't see Superstar as one of my favorite games in the series, but Ultra honestly was my favorite for a long time until some of Kirby's more modern adventures. If you're gonna play Superstar, play Ultra and experience one of his most iconic adventures in the best way possible. That took a while, but there's only 2 more games left in this marathon. The final game Nintendo published for the Super Nintendo, Kirby's Dreamland 3, and then after that we wrap this up with Kirby 64. So until then, go play Superstar Ultra if you haven't, and I'll see you next time.